Franklin Reed stood motionless on his front lawn, the morning sun casting a soft golden hue over the faded wood of his porch. His hands, scarred and calloused from decades of hard labor, trembled slightly as he unfolded the thick envelope that had arrived earlier. The paper inside felt heavy, too heavy. It was official. He scanned the words once, then again, just to be sure he wasn't imagining it. Violation of neighborhood standards. Fine, $50,000. Failure to comply will result in foreclosure. Franklin's jaw tightened. His crime? He hadn't painted his fence. The same weather-worn fence his father had built with his bare hands over half a century ago. The same fence that stood through storms, seasons, and the loss of Franklin's wife 2 years prior. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was memory. It was history. And now, according to the Homeowners Association led by Cheryl Lansing, a woman with a clipboard addiction and a God complex, it was an eyesore. Franklin's lips curled into a bitter half-smile. $50,000. For paint. The letter might as well have said, "We want you out, now." He didn't need to read the rest. The wording was carefully sterile, but the message was clear. You don't belong here anymore. For months, they had chipped away at him. Letters in the mailbox, notes taped to his door, complaints about his lawn being unmanicured, about the mailbox being non-compliant with community aesthetic, about the old barn leaning slightly to the left, like an old man with a sore hip. He'd ignored it all, not because he didn't care, but because he thought they'd eventually grow tired. But now they wanted to take his home. Franklin folded the letter slowly, like a man at a funeral folding a flag. Then he crumpled it with one hand and tossed it into the trash bin with the other. No, not today, not ever. He turned and looked toward the shed in the backyard. Quiet. Waiting. Inside were the same tools his father had used to build that fence. The same tools Franklin had used to repair it every few years. Tools that had built more than wood. They had built a man's life. They thought he was just some old man. They thought wrong. He took a deep breath, squinting against the rising sun. Let them come. He had nothing left to lose, and one hell of a secret they'd never seen coming. It hadn't always been like this. When Franklin first moved back into the old house after his wife passed, the quiet streets of Willowbrook Ridge seemed like a blessing. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked picture-perfect in real estate brochures. White fences, trimmed hedges, friendly nods from neighbors walking their golden retrievers at 7 a.m. But it didn't take long for that picture to crack. The first letter arrived tucked neatly into his mailbox, printed on glossy paper with a gold HOA emblem embossed at the top. It wasn't hostile, just patronizing. Dear Mr. Reed, we've noticed your fence paint is peeling in several areas. Please repaint to meet the neighborhood's visual harmony guidelines within 14 days. Franklin chuckled when he read it. Visual harmony. The fence had been there before half these houses were even built. Before Cheryl Lansing showed up with her French press coffee and her laser pointer attitude. It had stood strong through floods, blizzards, and heartbreak. Still, he tossed the letter aside, didn't even think twice. Then came the second, then the third, and then the fines. $150 for overgrown vegetation, $300 for an unapproved mailbox design, $500 because his barn's rustic charm was deemed aesthetic pollution. It wasn't about maintenance. It wasn't even about rules. It was about control. Cheryl Lansing and her HOA weren't just trying to maintain order. They were trying to scrub out anything that didn't fit their polished image of suburbia. And Franklin, with his aging truck, weathered boots, and refusal to play dress-up for his own porch, was sticking out like a sore thumb. He'd always been a quiet man, didn't like confrontation, didn't like drama. He'd seen enough of that during his years working infrastructure projects across the Midwest. Cities fell apart when small people got big power, so he let it go, paid a few small fines here and there, ignored the letters, repaired what he could, but each fix seemed to spark a new complaint. Then they came for the barn. A letter arrived citing it as a structural hazard and gave him 30 days to demolish it. Franklin stood in that barn the night the letter arrived, breathing in the scent of dry hay and wood dust. The sunlight poured through the slats, golden and soft, catching the edges of old photographs nailed to the beams. His father's hammer still hung on the wall. That barn wasn't just lumber, it was legacy. He didn't tear it down. And from that moment, he became target number one. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning, same as any other. He was drinking coffee on the porch. Daisy, the old golden retriever with a graying muzzle, curled up by his feet. A loud knock shook the front door. Cheryl Lansing herself stood there, flanked by two men in matching navy polo shirts with plastic badges clipped to their belts. They called themselves HOA compliance officers. Cheryl wore her usual smirk, the kind that screamed, "I run this place." "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone sugary but sharp, "this is your final notice. The fence is in violation. You have 1 week or further action will be taken." He said nothing, just stared at her. "You may think this is unfair," she added, "but these are the standards everyone agreed to." He almost laughed. He hadn't agreed to anything. The HOA was formed long after his father sold most of the land. Franklin had simply been living on what remained, the last remnant of a life built with calloused hands and honest work. "Have a nice day," Cheryl said with a little nod, as if she'd done him a favor. A week later came the $50,000 fine, and with it, the threat. 30 days or they'd take the house. Franklin didn't sleep that night. He sat in the old rocking chair on the porch, Daisy at his side, listening to the cicadas hum in the trees. His mind was racing, not with fear, but with memory. Because Cheryl Lansing and her board of suburban tyrants had made a very big mistake. They had forgotten who owned the road into Willowbrook Ridge, and they had no idea what kind of man they were pushing. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Franklin pulled down the attic ladder. Dust danced in the sliver of light from above as he climbed, the old wooden steps creaking beneath his boots. This attic hadn't seen much life in years, but Franklin knew exactly what he was looking for. Tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt in an old metal lunchbox was a weathered leather folder. He blew off the dust, unbuckled the strap, and opened it. Inside, maps, deeds. Letters typed on yellowing paper with his father's signature scrawled in ink that had started to fade with time. But the legality remained as sharp as ever. Franklin has traced his finger along the bold line that cut across one of the maps. That line was Rose Hollow Road, the only access road in and out of Willowbrook Ridge. And it was his. It had always been his. Back in 1974, when Franklin's father sold most of the farmland to developers, he did something the HOA never thought to ask about. He kept the deed to the access road. It was smart, old school, the kind of move a man made when he didn't trust corporations to treat land with the respect it deserved. And when the developers came in and built their cookie-cutter paradise, they never noticed that the road wasn't part of the package. They paved over it, lined it with street lights and sidewalks, named it something fancy, Briarcrest Boulevard. But underneath all the asphalt and vanity, it still belonged to the Reeds. Franklin had let them use it for decades, never asked for rent, never made a fuss. Why would he? He was a man of peace. He didn't like making noise. But now, with Cheryl Lansing trying to fine him into bankruptcy, that road had just become his weapon. He picked up his old landline, yes, landline, and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Ben Morales," a voice answered. Franklin smiled. "Still pretending to be busy, huh?" "Franklin?" Ben paused, then let out a whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. I thought you retired from bothering people." "I did, but I got bothered first." He explained the situation, everything from the letters to the fine to the fence that wasn't fancy enough. Ben listened in silence, the way good lawyers do. Then Franklin dropped the hammer. "They don't know I own the road." A pause, then, "Wait, what?" "I got the deed. My father never signed it over, never sold it. They've been using it all these years thinking it's theirs. It ain't." Ben didn't laugh. He didn't even respond for a moment. Then he said with more excitement than Franklin had heard in years, "Buddy, you just flipped the table. This is going to be fun." By the end of that week, Ben had already started drafting legal documents. Injunctions, notices of private ownership, warnings to cease and desist. The whole legal buffet. Franklin, meanwhile, got to work in his own way. He made copies of everything. Deeds, plat maps, letters from the 70s. He didn't own a scanner, but his hands were steady enough to snap pictures on his flip phone and send them to Ben. He wasn't tech savvy, but he knew the law of the land. And this land, it was his. And here's the thing about power. It doesn't always come in a suit or with a badge. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 78-year-old man with a stubborn streak and a secret no one saw coming. The HOA had pushed too far, and Franklin Reed was about to slam the brakes on the entire neighborhood. Not with rage, not with threats, but with the one thing HOA tyrants fear the most. At first, it was quiet, too quiet. Franklin had expected a knock on the door the moment his lawyer filed the cease and desist, but 3 days passed, then 5. The mailbox sat empty, no new letters, no warnings, no pink slips threatening his geraniums. That was the first sign something was wrong. Because silence in Cheryl Lansing's world wasn't peace, it was a war drum. On the 6th morning, Franklin was in his garden, carefully transplanting tomatoes, when a black SUV rolled up and parked at the curb. 2 men stepped out, sturdy, square-jawed types in matching navy polos and khakis, clipboards in hand. They wore wraparound sunglasses like they were gearing up for a military operation, not a fence inspection. One of them swaggered toward him. "Mr. Reed," he said, flashing a laminated badge that looked like it had been made at a Staples. "We're here for a mandatory property inspection. HOA compliance." Franklin wiped his hands on his jeans and leaned on his shovel. "You're trespassing." The man grinned. "Just doing our job, sir. Wouldn't want you to miss another violation." Franklin didn't flinch. "You're not law enforcement. You don't get to walk onto private property without permission." The smile faded. "You'll regret this, old man." Franklin's grip tightened around the wooden handle of his shovel. "I've regretted worse." They backed off for now, but the threat hung in the air like the humidity before a thunderstorm. That night, Franklin bolted the doors and left the porch light on. The next morning it began. The fence, the one his father built with his bare hands, was gone, torn down in the middle of the night. They didn't even try to hide it. A crew had shown up with machinery, bright orange vests, and a garbage bin on wheels. They bulldozed the east side of the fence, claiming it posed a hazard to children walking nearby. No warning, no paperwork, just destruction. When Franklin stepped outside and saw the splintered posts and cracked wood, something in him broke. He didn't scream, didn't cry. He just stood there for a long moment, staring at the place where memory used to be. Then he walked back inside, picked up the phone, and called Ben. "They've started." Ben's voice on the other end was tense. "Did you get photos?" "Yeah, they even left their tire tracks." "Perfect," Ben replied. "This just got real." But the HOA wasn't finished. 2 nights later, Franklin's golden retriever, Daisy, vanished. She wasn't the type to run. She barely made it up the porch stairs anymore. Franklin called her for hours, flashlight in hand, boots stomping through the overgrown grass and the empty streets. He checked the barn, the garden, even the neighbor's yard. Nothing. The next morning, his phone rang. It was his neighbor from across the street, Pauline, a kind widow who baked too much and minded everyone's business just enough to be useful. "Franklin," she whispered, "I think you need to come over here." When he arrived, Pauline led him to her garage. Inside, covered by a tarp, was an unmarked white van. In the back, locked behind a flimsy cage, were Daisy and half a dozen other neighborhood pets. Cats, dogs, even a rabbit. Franklin's heart dropped. "They took them," she said. "Somebody came in the middle of the night. I heard the engine, didn't think much of it, until I found this van this morning parked beside the hedge. No plates, no witnesses." But Franklin didn't need a confession. He knew. The HOA had crossed into the personal. He called the police. They shrugged. "No evidence," they said. "No fingerprints. It could have been kids." Franklin looked the officer in the eye. "Kids don't drive coordinated pet heists in HOA-branded jackets." But nothing happened. The law, it seemed, had no room for quiet retaliation. Franklin brought Daisy home and sat with her for hours, stroking her fur, his mind spiraling deeper into resolve. They wanted him gone. They wanted to break him. But they had no idea who they were messing with. Because 3 days later, a utility truck rolled up to his property. The logo on the side read WRA, Willowbrook Ridge Association. A man hopped out, clipboard in hand, hard hat on head, and walked straight toward the electric meter. Franklin stepped off the porch. "Need something?" "We're here to terminate services," the worker said flatly, "per HOA directive." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "You're going to shut off my power and water?" Until compliance is achieved, yes, sir. Franklin stood silent for a beat. Then he nodded. Okay. He turned, walked into his shed, and returned with an old wrench that had seen more years than Cheryl's entire career. He moved past the worker, knelt down at the meter, and with a few expert turns, shut it off himself. Then he moved to the water line and did the same. When he stood back up, the crew looked confused. I don't need your help, he said. I can live without lights. I can fetch water. But what I won't do is kneel. He walked back to his porch, sat down beside Daisy, and took a long sip from a warm thermos of coffee. The message was clear. You want war? Fine. But don't bring bureaucracy to a man who built bridges for a living. Bring an army, because Franklin Reed wasn't giving up. He was just getting started. That night, the air in Willowbrook Ridge was thick with tension. The homes, normally glowing with porch lights and soft jazz drifting through open windows, sat dark and quiet, like soldiers bracing for battle. Franklin's house, however, flickered with a lone oil lamp in the front window, casting long shadows across the room. He was tired, but not broken. He sat at the dining table surrounded by legal folders, handwritten notes, old maps, and a worn-out copy of the land agreement signed by his father in Moisevifu. Daisy lay beside him, her head resting gently on his boot, her tail thumping slowly every time Franklin shifted in his chair. At exactly 8:17 p.m., he stood, grabbed a large sheet of plywood from the garage, and began painting. By sunrise, it stood proud at the entrance to the neighborhood, right where the road curved into Willowbrook Ridge, where the sidewalk met private property. The sign read, Private Road, temporarily closed, due to liability risk, access by request only. Contact F. Reed. Within 2 hours, the entire neighborhood ground to a halt. Cars backed up in both directions. Parents late for school drop-offs, grocery deliveries circling like lost drones, HOA board members stuck behind their own gated smugness. A local plumber honked his horn so long it triggered someone's car alarm. It didn't take long for Cheryl Lansing to come storming down the sidewalk in her blazer and high heels, huffing like a winded hawk. She stopped at the sign, staring at it like it had personally insulted her family. Franklin, she shouted, eyes scanning the houses. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The message was already spreading. Franklin had the power. And Cheryl had a meeting with reality. By midday, Franklin's phone rang. The number was familiar. HOA headquarters. He didn't answer. The next day, a courier delivered a certified letter from Cheryl's lawyer demanding that Franklin cease obstruction of communal infrastructure. He framed it and hung it next to the thermostat. On the third day of the road closure, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Residents packed the community center, some furious, others curious, but most just fed up. The whispers had turned into conversations, the conversations into grumbles, and now a slow-burning revolution was taking root. Franklin showed up 15 minutes early, sat in the back, and waited. Cheryl stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, trying her best to project poise. But the sweat on her forehead betrayed her. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, this neighborhood is under siege by a resident who refuses to respect our standards. This is about order, about unity, about control, someone muttered loudly from the crowd. Cheryl blinked. Excuse me? Franklin stood slowly, holding a thick manila envelope in one hand. I think what she meant, he said calmly, is that this neighborhood is under siege by the truth. All eyes turned. He walked to the front, placed the envelope on the table, and pulled out a neatly arranged stack of documents. This, he said, holding up a folded map, is the original land survey of Willowbrook Ridge. And this, he raised a notarized deed, is the legal ownership of the only road into this neighborhood. Signed by my father, recorded at the county office. Never sold, never transferred. Gasps, murmurs, a few phones came out to start recording. You've all been living here under the assumption that the HOA owns everything, Franklin continued. But the truth is, they never bothered to look beyond their own rule books. They built a kingdom on land they didn't own. Cheryl's mouth opened, then shut. She looked like a politician caught without a speech. You're bluffing, she said finally. Franklin turned to Ben, who stood up from the second row and handed a copy of the deed to Cheryl's lawyer. Not bluffing, Ben said. And we've already filed an injunction against further HOA actions until this matter is resolved. If you so much as remove one more mailbox, We'll see you in court." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then from the back, a soft voice cut through the tension. "I believe him." It was Mavis, the sweet, silver-haired widow who always brought Franklin peach cobbler in the summer. She stood up, eyes fixed on Cheryl. "For years, we've all walked on eggshells, afraid of a letter in the mail, a fine on the door, a threat whispered over hedges. This man lost his wife. He minds his business. And you went after him like a pack of wolves." One by one, more voices joined. "I got fined for painting my shutters green. They made me pull up my rose bushes. They told my kid his basketball hoop was a visual disturbance." The dam had broken. The crowd, once silent, now buzzed with decades of quiet resentment. Franklin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just looked Cheryl Lansing in the eye and said, "You forgot something, Cheryl. You thought this was about me, but it's about all of us." And with that, the tide turned. The HOA wasn't just facing Franklin Reed anymore. They were facing a neighborhood that had finally had enough. The next HOA meeting wasn't just an event. It was an uprising wrapped in lawn chairs and bottled water. They had to move it to the town's public library because the community center couldn't hold the crowd. People came early. People brought folding chairs, baby strollers, lawn signs. One guy even brought popcorn, like he was watching a courtroom drama. Franklin, as usual, arrived quietly. Button-down shirt, clean jeans, worn boots, and a face that said he wasn't here to yell. He was here to end it. The room was packed wall to wall with neighbors, some who had lived in Willowbrook Ridge for decades, others who'd moved in last spring. All of them had one thing in common now. They'd been touched at some point by Cheryl Lansing's HOA reign of terror. And this was her last stand. Cheryl stood at the front, clutching a clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. "As HOA president," she began, her voice already shaking, "I called this emergency meeting to address the misinformation being circulated about road ownership and resident compliance. It's critical we restore order before this neighborhood falls into—" Franklin stood up in the back. He didn't say anything, just walked slowly to the front with that same manila envelope, thicker this time, full of signed affidavits, legal statements, and documentation too airtight to ignore. "Before it falls into what, Cheryl?" he asked calmly. "Freedom?" The room chuckled, not mocking but relieved. Cheryl bristled. "Mr. Reed, this isn't your meeting." "Maybe not," he said, placing the envelope on the table. "But it's everyone else's." He turned to face the crowd. "For years you've been told you don't have a choice, that your porch color is too bold, that your grass is too tall, that your home, the place you tuck your kids into bed every night, belongs to a committee that wasn't elected, just inherited by power-hungry busybodies." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. "But let me tell you something," Franklin continued. "When you let people bully you with clipboards, it's only a matter of time before they try to take your dignity too. I've been fined, harassed, and threatened with foreclosure because I wouldn't repaint a fence built by my father. And when I refused to bend, they cut my power and stole my dog." Gasps. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" Franklin's voice rose, not shouting, but iron solid. "I shut down that road because it was mine. Not out of spite, but out of principle. Because the HOA forgot the golden rule. You don't get to push people around just because you have a logo and a title. This isn't about paint or fences or bushes. It's about respect." He looked at Cheryl. "And you lost it." Cheryl's lawyer stood up, flustered, holding out a hand. "None of this has been proven in court." Ben Morales cut in, stepping forward with his own stack of documents. "Actually, it has. Deeds recorded, injunction granted, judge's order filed last Thursday. This HOA has no legal authority over Mr. Reed's property or the road, which means the road's future now rests entirely in Mr. Reed's hands." Complete silence. Then Franklin said softly, "And I'm offering access back to this community for $1 a year." Mavis stood up again, tearfully smiling. "You're a better man than they deserve, Franklin." He smiled back. "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to fix what's broken." Cheryl's face had gone pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then quietly, someone from the board whispered to her. She nodded slowly. At last, she stepped to the microphone, her voice stripped of all that smug confidence. I I apologize to Mr. Reed and to the residents of Willowbrook Ridge for the overreach and distress caused under my leadership. Effective immediately, I resigned from the HOA board. There was no cheering, no dramatic applause, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when something oppressive finally dies and people aren't sure whether to grieve or be grateful. Franklin nodded respectfully, stepped away from the mic, and returned to his seat. The meeting wasn't about winning, it was about ending something the right way. No gloating, no revenge, just balance. The residents voted, then and there, to dissolve the existing HOA board. In its place, they would form a new resident-led community council. No fines, no forced conformity, just neighbors talking to neighbors again. And Franklin, he quietly handed over a simple contract. A symbolic one-more-year lease for the road. Renewable only at his discretion. He didn't want control, he just wanted peace. And that was exactly what was finally returning to Willowbrook Ridge. The very next morning, Franklin got up before dawn. Mist still clung to the fields, curling around fence posts and creeping down the empty road like nature reclaiming its quiet. He poured himself a mug of strong black coffee, whistled gently for Daisy, and together they stepped out onto the porch. He didn't say much. He didn't need to, because peace had a sound all its own. And for the first time in a long time, it was finally back. Franklin walked to the entrance of the road where his hand-painted sign had once stood tall in defiance. He took it down slowly, carefully, like lowering a flag. In its place, he posted a new wooden sign, carved by hand and brushed with dark lacquer. Access granted by agreement. Respect required always. F. Reed. That afternoon, the cars returned. Slowly, cautiously, like animals testing a stream that had once shocked them. Delivery trucks rolled through. School buses groaned up the hill again. Kids waved from back windows. And neighbors who once barely nodded, now honked, smiled, even waved as they passed his house. Not out of obligation, out of gratitude. That week, Cheryl Lansing moved out quietly. No announcement, no farewell, just a U-Haul at dawn and a for sale sign posted with little fanfare. No one really said goodbye, not even her clipboard. At the next community gathering, held potluck style on Franklin's front lawn, Mavis brought her famous peach cobbler. Franklin sat in his rocking chair, Daisy at his side, a plate balanced on his knee. "You showed them," Mavis said softly, watching kids run barefoot down the street. Franklin sipped his sweet tea, squinting into the setting sun. "I didn't have to shout," he said. "Just had to stand long enough for the right people to notice." She smiled. "You're the kind of neighbor people write stories about." He chuckled. "I'm just the kind of neighbor who reads the fine print." That fall, the new resident council planted a small tree near the entrance of Willowbrook Ridge, right next to Franklin's restored fence. Built from reclaimed cedar, not HOA-approved vinyl. On one of the central posts, carved clean and deep, were the words, "Built by my father, defended by his son." It wasn't just a tribute, it was a declaration. A reminder that land has memory, that homes aren't just property, they're stories. That fences, no matter how weathered, often guard more than yards. They guard pride, love, legacy. The neighborhood changed after that. Gone were the passive-aggressive notes, the ridiculous fines. The rulebook rewrote itself, one neighborly act at a time. Someone planted wildflowers without permission. Another family installed a treehouse. Someone else painted their mailbox bright yellow just because it made them smile. No one complained, because now they understood. They weren't just protecting a neighborhood, they were protecting the people in it. And Franklin? He rebuilt. Not just the fence, but the barn, the porch swing, the vegetable garden that had once gotten a written warning. He even installed a little workbench out back where neighborhood kids could come by after school. "Mr. Reed," one of them asked one day, "can you teach me how to build a birdhouse?" Franklin grinned, pulled out his father's old hammer, and handed it over. "Only if you promise to never let anyone tell you what kind of bird can live in it." The boy laughed. And just like that, something new was planted. Something deeper than flowers or fence posts. Respect. That's what it came down to. Not dominance, not control, just mutual respect, quietly earned and fiercely defended. Franklin never sought revenge. He wasn't interested in punishment. What he wanted, what he stood for, was something far rarer: dignity. And by standing firm, by quietly resisting when others bowed, he gave that back to his neighbors, one forgotten voice at a time. Because sometimes justice doesn't ride in on sirens or wear a robe. Sometimes justice looks like an old man with a cup of coffee and a dog by his side, sitting on a porch built with his father's hands. And a neighborhood finally waking up to what matters most. Now it's your turn. Have you ever faced an overreaching HOA? Have you ever been fined for something ridiculous or felt powerless in your own home? Tell us your story in the comments below. We read every one of them because your voice, it matters. And if Franklin's story reminded you of someone you love or of a fight you're still in, hit that like button, and share the story and subscribe for more real-life justice right here every week.